Today's guest is Jay Rosenthal. He's the founder of CPSprotect Consulting Services, which is a first of its kind consulting firm helping families across the United States prepare for and navigate child protective services investigations. This is a topic I know very little about, so I'm anxious to hear about your journey, Jay. So thank you for joining me.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on, Jeremy.
So many of my listeners will not have heard your name before. So talk a bit about your background, where you're from, who you are, and what you do.
Oh, this is a fun journey. I grew up in New York. I went to college like every good millennial did. uh, Majored in psychology. I had intended to actually go for my PhD in clinical psychology. Amazingly, health-wise, I ended up being born with three rare chronic genetic medical conditions. So I like to say I pulled the genetic short straw, and it kind of derailed that plan. Life truly never goes as you expect it. So I graduated with my bachelor's in psychology. What the heck are you supposed to do with that? Yeah, I mean, great. I can work at Subway, maybe, sure. I've got some great skills. It's, I'm, yes, I may be a deep thinker, but I'm about as credentialed as the next starving philosopher. So, got to figure it out. So, I went into social services. I started working with children, and then I moved up to adults. And as technology and modern medicine continue to grow and develop, uh, more and more opportunities became accessible to me. And for a while, I was working with adults, and what I saw was there was no room for growth, and the whole system was just trying to maintain the status quo, and it really wasn't working too well. I wanted more of a challenge for myself. So I decided, why not go into child welfare? Now, for those that are familiar with child welfare, they will look at that question as naive. So if you think that question was sensible, like I did at the time, I don't blame you, but I've gained a lot of hindsight since then. So I went to work for Child Protective Services in New York City, investigating allegations of child abuse and neglect. And very quickly, I learned that civil service is a very different game from the private sector. First of all, the first thing I said when I literally walked into my office was, God, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to do my job. Now that makes sense, but when you're dealing with politics and government, merit is a lot less prized than who your friends are. And I clearly didn't understand that. I was also searching for my calling, because I remember at my prior job when I was working in case management, one of the conditions I have causes epileptic seizures, among other things. And I had collapsed at the office one day. I was brought to the office in an attempt to just pretend that everything was completely normal. I checked myself out of the hospital, hopped on the E-train, headed right back to my office in Long Island City to finish my workday after signing out of the ER against medical advice, because I felt fine. Well, lo and behold, when I got there, my supervisor was absolutely shocked to see me. Why are you here? Me, for whatever reason, basically said, well, I'm here to finish my workday. I'm back from the hospital. Any of your listeners who are an entrepreneur or an employer or in management will be cringing at the liability fiasco I was waiting to happen. My supervisor did not let me return to work, and instead sent me home. So I headed back to my place, and all of a sudden my head started to hurt. And it was like no pain I'd ever felt. This was as I was walking to the 7 train. I realized I was not going to make it home alone. Thankfully, my father actually worked in Midtown, and I called him and I said, I can't make it back on my own. I need someone to escort me back to my place. And so we met up. We got on the train together. I didn't make it out of the Bronx. I was living upstate at the time. The train had to stop, and an ambulance had to meet me and take me to the hospital again. Me being stubborn again, I refused morphine. And then they told me when I couldn't sit still on the CT scanner as I'm screaming in pain that if they can't diagnose me, they can't treat me. So finally I took morphine. And what I will say about morphine is it is a hell of a drug. The difference was night and day. I was definitely no longer in pain. And I could say until I got the news from the doctor, I was kind of happy. Because as soon as the words acute subdural hematoma left the doctor's lips, I kind of knew what I was looking at. I knew my risk of death was higher than average, substantially, that I wasn't going to live a full life. And I've been preparing for a while. I was in my mid-20s at the time. I've been preparing since my mid-teens for something like this. And so I knew that acute subdural hematomas, the mortality rate is 60 to 90%. And even if I survived, the chances that I was going to be the same person I was that day was not particularly high. Talk about miracles. I made pretty much a full recovery. Are there small issues? Yes, but it was touch and go for about 4 days. 6 days later, I was back at work. I just do not slow down. But what I will say is I learned a lot about what was important in life, what mattered. I have not once since have I been upset if I lost if I lost my phone or my wallet or they got stolen. They were just material objects. You start to understand that that what really matters is what you do with your time, who you spend your time with. Those are the things that you regret, things that you didn't do, the people that you didn't see, the things that you didn't say. Those are the things that you actually regret at the end. Granted, I don't. This is good wisdom to have when you're younger. Granted, I don't recommend you go and get a potentially fatal head injury to expose yourself to that earlier. So please do not take this as any sort of advice to go and literally maim yourself and possibly kill yourself. Leave that to Johnny Knoxville and the rest of the Jackass cast. Anyway, back to when I was working with Child Protective Services in New York City. The first sign that something was up, was the first case that I'd ever taken to court. It was a domestic violence case. Parents were separated. Mom was dating this thug with a rap sheet longer than I am tall. Yes, I know. Look, I'm only 5'7". There's a reason that, there aren't a whole lot of Jews in the NBA, but still, his rap sheet was longer than I am tall. And I referred Mom to a domestic violence counselor who worked for a community-based organization, not CPS contracted prevention services, which is a taxpayer-funded in-home contract. And I got a lot of flack for it from my supervisor. And I was puzzled as to why, because I didn't refer Mom to low quality or irrelevant services. So why was it such a problem? And I loved what I did with child welfare simply because nobody actually wants to see you knock on their door. If someone from Child Protective Services knocks on your door and flashes their badge, here's what they're saying without even opening their mouth. someone called the government and said you're a bad parent, and I'm here to find out why. May I come in?
Mm-hmm.
Now, anybody who says yes, sure, would you like some tea, is out of their mind. Uh, the what I came to know as I went down the rabbit hole is that the terminology is so vague, and the liability for failure of the government to act so high that parents are held to a standard of almost perfection. And so if child welfare happens to show up and there's any sort of minuscule question, well, the allegations could be substantiated against you. They use very low standards. Your children could be removed. It could cost you tens of thousands of dollars with an attorney, and and the court appointed attorneys, really, they've got 80 something cases. They don't, they've got their basic template. And the amount of funding that's coming from the federal government means that some of the bad actors, in politics and the child welfare system, don't exactly make navigating the system particularly easy. And so you get a lot of families who are separated or have their lives upended uh, over trivial issues that tend to make absolutely no sense. And after a while, I thought, I came to a crossroads because if you're not making if you're not making 6 or 7 figures, and you're not make and you don't it doesn't look like you're helping people, because all the bureaucracy, all the liability, all this other stuff, it doesn't look like it's actually productive. Well, then what exactly are you doing? Life has to have some sort of meaning. You have to have some sort of motivation. And when you can't explain that, then it's decision time. And so I had three choices. I could either make the best of what I saw as a bad system. I could leave my calling entirely. And I loved working with families and finding why they wanted to work with me for a reason other than, if you don't, I'll take you to court.
Right.
Because otherwise, it's like you have your threat. They comply with you until the threat is gone. And I tend to describe CPS investigations as among the most frightening experiences any parent can endure, just because of the potential consequences and the amount of power that they actually have. So the last option was create what I thought was needed. The pandemic thankfully brought amazing technologies to the fray that could potentially allow this, because when you work with the government, there are conflict of interest laws that make it very difficult to use the knowledge that you have to actually in productive ways in the private sector. There are a lot of restrictions, many that last a lifetime.
Mm.
But thankfully, uh, some of the best solutions come from thinking outside the box and thinking of what everybody else hasn't thought of yet, what the regulators haven't gotten to yet.
Hmm.
And that was the idea behind CPSprotect Consulting Services. What if you could get to families early? What if you could help them level the playing field? What if they didn't have to be in fear and they had that assistance in their homes? And initially, I was actually, at the time, I was, I came up with the business plan in 2021, and it turns out for controlling the seizures, we'd run out of medications in August of 2021. Uh, so weeks after I came up with the business plan, my doctor says to me, I think we need to consider surgical options.
Mm.
So
Oh, wow.
everything just went crazy. So I started having to go through every medical test you can imagine. I was in and out of the office while I was trying to get this mysterious business uh, off the ground. And of course, with the conflict of interest laws, I was going to have to go cold turkey immediately. Thankfully, I had invested fairly well, so I had the capacity to do that. So over over several months while I'm getting CPS Protect ready for launch, shopping for the tools that I need to actually make this a reality. Finally, they say, okay, we can't remove the part of your brain that we want to remove without causing serious damage. So we're going to implant what's essentially a pacemaker
Right.
for the brain. We're going to implant it inside your head. And so they said, okay, so now that we have all the data we need, we can do this May 19th. I said, okay, so now I know. So I'm going to submit my resignation and I'm going to launch May 23rd because recovery should be fairly quick. So 4 days after the surgery and 3 days after getting home, I plan to launch my business. Well, it sounds like a great plan, right? Right after brain surgery?
No,
Yeah.
no.
So the surgery was successful. Uh, I was discharged at noon the next day, and I was fine. And then Sunday night, I started. I was going to launch on a Monday, so Sunday night, I hadn't had these since pretty much since I was a kid. I had a night terror, and Monday my head started hurting, and I had night terrors 2 more consecutive nights, and I realized I was literally ignoring the stress of quitting my job, losing my safety net, launching a business, you know, and having surgery, uh, and it really that first week was really rough. I will say the first lesson I learned in business was if you're going to launch a business, wait at least a week after being discharged from the hospital for brain surgery. At least a week.
At least a
Um,
week.
uh,
Okay.
uh, you would think that I wouldn't need to learn this, that this would be common sense, but well, yeah, I guess not. At least not in my case. But I know now. So if I ever do this again, uh, I will not be doing the, I will be waiting at least a week after brain surgery. Uh, we launched with a very streamlined plan. We were able to, uh, because the laws are so different and practices are somewhat different across states, it's very difficult to do something like this nationwide. But if you really want to have an impact, it needs to be scalable. So that was one of the things that we did is we actually made it scalable. And what we had was there would be an intake, families would pay, and then we would have a consultation, and we had these templates with personalized plans. But what I found was as inflation really started to hit and a dozen eggs started to hit the double digits in dollars, uh, this was changing. And although there are plenty of people who are in the middle class and upper class who are affected by CPS, 1 in 3 children, according to a 10-year longitudinal study in the United States, will face CPS involvement before they hit the age of 18 nationwide. It is not uncommon. It does hit those that are lower income more than those who are higher income, but those who are higher income are not immune from it. And it is getting more and more prevalent as the terms are defined much more loosely. This is not easy to navigate.
Well, I could
But what
see. I was going to say I could see from your what you said earlier. The government sees it as liability, right? If they get involved in a situation and then they let it go,
Mhm.
they feel liable, and they don't want that liability because then it's a big deal. So they want to then get more involved, and then it kind of spirals out of control from there.
Exactly. But then who's the parent? You or the government?
Right.
And
That's
that's actually a big question. Is when we see what's going on in schools uh, nowadays, parental rights are a very big hot button issue. But what I saw was for the consultations that we were having, the $500, $600 that it could cost to get the services that we were providing, it was going to be too much, especially during a recession. So I decided to put my entrepreneur hat right back on and think, okay, how can we reduce the cost? And we came up with what I call Urgent Assist, which has basically turned it into a nationwide hotline. Now we don't have it operating 24/7 yet, but we do have it operating 7 days a week with former CPS investigators nationwide. The subscription, it's billed on an annual basis, but it can be as low as $11.99 a month. And imagine being able to have a former CPS investigator on the phone, either while CPS is there helping you, or if you want to appeal the allegations in an administrative review, because, for example, the allegations aren't determined in court. They're determined by the agency. We're very good at preparing families for administrative reviews. We're very good at making sure that families are prepared, in the event CPS becomes involved. We also, if families feel that their attorney is not doing enough, or they want someone else looking outside the courtroom and actually looking at the policy and the other aspects for recourse, these are the areas where we are really good. And instead of paying $5, $10, $15, $25,000 in attorney's fees for a retainer, and then spending maybe $50, $100, $200,000 in total, our services, you could pay less than $200, and they're also coming with perks, discounts on other services. We have a technical blog called CPS Knowledge that covers additional information, and these year-long subscriptions come with a certain amount of urgent assist calls. The idea is that the way to, when we see a lot of nonprofits that try to offer a lot of, a lot of helpful information for free. But what happens is either they offer high quality services for free and a few lucky people get it and everyone else is hung out to dry, or it's just, well, maybe when I get to it and it's not on your schedule and it's not premium. And that's a big issue. You really want to get it out to as many people as possible. And you still want people who are clearly abusive and neglectful toward their children to be held accountable. But at the same time, the child welfare system in the United States has gotten out of control, and begging the government to fix a problem of its own design is usually somewhat futile, especially if if the people that are speaking out the most don't have anything to offer for a quid pro quo. Mm-hmm. Because that's how politics really works. It's, for the most part, quid pro quo.
Wow, that's interesting. So I'm going to roll it back a little bit. I'm curious. So when you went to school for psychology, did you have a purpose behind that? You said you wanted to maybe go into clinical psychology. Did you feel that you were planning to go to distance, right? I'm thinking when I was a high schooler, I was thinking easiest education possible, not a doctor, right? Is a long grind. You had initially planned to do that grind for clinical psychology?
I can make a Jewish joke here, but I think I'll skip that. For me, I was fascinated by the puzzle that is the human mind. The complexity that comes with the human experience is like no other. The question of why we do what we do, who we are, and where nature meets nurture. If you can ever answer those questions, you will go, there's no limit to what you can do in life. People are the ultimate puzzle. And if you've ever seen or endured a marital squabble, you will understand exactly why. There are certain things like women, if you're, generally speaking, tend to be more sensitive to colder temperatures than men. Now, of course, there are plenty of exceptions to that rule, but evolutionary psychology has found that that was that is literally by design, that it is to ensure that men and women also get space from each other. There's actually
Hmm.
an evolutionary psychological component to it, because especially if you are like humans do, or used to before the invention of divorce, mate for life. um, the, you do need some space and you do need some balance. Now, this may be disproven later on. Science overwrites itself constantly, but it's amazing to see that we're actually designed to fight about that.
Hmm.
Uh, Not that anybody actually likes fighting that much, especially with their spouse, but there is so much to who we are. We will never be able to fully understand it. Um, the only hell that I can imagine that is worse than winning at the casino every time. I mean, maybe the first 18 times it'd be great, but after a while it would turn into hell. Um, the only hell I can imagine that would be worse would be a world where, or an existence where there are no more questions to ask, where
Hmm.
there is nothing else to learn, where I already know everything.
Right.
Because then, why bother?
Hmm. So, was it by chance that you fell into a career in the child protective services arena, or because you had the psychology degree, you thought, "Oh, this is something I can leverage"? How did that first job come about?
It, Well, that was actually my third job. I
Okay.
had been a milieu therapist, and then I had been a case manager. I was looking to move up in income, and I was looking for something that I really wanted to do. And because my health was unfortunately bringing me down, that was why I didn't go to grad school. It wasn't because I couldn't; it was because my health deteriorated, and unfortunately, uh, life takes some pretty precarious turns. So I ended up at child welfare, I think, because really the some of the highest paying jobs in social services, actually all of the highest paying jobs in social services, uh, are government or government contracted.
Okay.
That's because here's the thing. In order to make money, you need consumers to buy your product or service. And social services don't tend to cater to those with lots of wealth.
Hmm.
So where does the money come from? And the answer is it usually doesn't come from cash flow. It comes from government contracts. And it comes from the taxpayers. So that's why you don't see many business to consumer, private sector, social entrepreneurial ventures. Is because usually there's no money in it. One of the reasons this was never tried is when you're looking at the types of people that are most likely to show up for something like what CPS Protect does. They're likely to be lower income. They're more likely to have tighter budgets and therefore try to maximize what they get out of every dollar. And so it is very difficult to make something like this work.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know that there is truly a magic formula for it. Um, it is a huge challenge. I think this is another reason that you really don't see many serial social entrepreneurs. You really don't. They have their calling, and the chances that something like that succeeds is, I would say, I don't know the statistics on this, but I would imagine it's lower than it would even be just going into marketing.
Mm.
Even if you do everything right, if the money isn't there, and especially with something like CPS Protect, where it's not like the government wants more friction.
Right.
So you have, if you're looking for corporate investors, for example, well, they're like, well, we don't want to piss off the government because we don't want more regulation. And I can't say I blame them. Or you look at, for example, the government. Yeah, sure, they're going to make their own lives harder. Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Sure. Uh, So you really have to, when it comes to funding, look at this in a very different, in a very different way than you do traditional entrepreneurship, especially if you are looking to keep the government out of it.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I've participated with a number of nonprofits in my area. My wife works for a nonprofit. And so I can see what you're talking about in terms of funding streams and where the money comes from. And yet in the social services realm, you're right, that is primarily a governmental thing. I mean, I think maybe in the distant past, maybe churches did it more, but that's a thing of the past, right? Government's heavily involved in the social welfare. So how does that then work out for your company? Like what are your plans in terms of growth, or what's next for you and your company?
Well, we actually, with Urgent Assist, with these calls, we have lowered the cost for what we do to much lower. We're actually looking to add uh, additional perks like a podcast that actually talks to former CPS investigators with practical information to add to our CPS knowledge publication,
Mm-hmm.
which people get as subscribers to Urgent Assist. We're also looking to get more into speaking engagements. Those can help, in times where things are more difficult for us. Those can help subsidize uh, our core product, Urgent Assist. As we do grow, I want to hire more child welfare consultants uh, to reach more people. I would also like to be able to eventually be at a point where we can partner with a nonprofit for those who are below the poverty line and really can't afford our services, to actually be able to reach some of them as well. Um, we already serve the entire country. I would hope that at some point, if we do get to really be preeminent and I would say in the revenue of about seven figures, that we could actually uh, start bankrolling, similar to the way the insurance industry uh,
Mm-hmm.
has has expanded, to actually fund uh, CPS Protect Consulting Services in other countries like Canada, uh, the UK, Australia, and beyond, and really make this more accessible to more people, uh, and promote parental rights without compromising child safety. Our tagline is saving children, preserving families. And that's because that's what Child Protective Services itself talks a lot about. Uh, just because those are the professed goals of Child Protective Services. Now, whether those uh, are their actual goals or they have ulterior motives, uh, depends on who you talk to.
Right.
Uh, but while our professed goals also match our real goals, let's be honest, we also have a profit motive. We would like to be able to live comfortable lives. Uh, but at the same time, you come to us, we're not beholden to the government or anybody else. Uh, when someone subscribes to our services, they get our undivided attention because the quid pro quo that the government is getting for, in offering its services, for us, the money that it takes for us to actually run it and devote the time and energy that we have is what satisfies it. So there's nobody else that we're answering to. And that's really important, is when you are actually trying to facilitate change, is building outside of is building the solution outside of what you see as the alleged problem.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, Jay, I'm very excited for what you're doing. I think it's important work, and I think it can change lives. And I just look forward to seeing your business flourish, because if it's flourishing, it's helping people. So thank you for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's my pleasure.